The lid of the coffin slipped for just a second, and in that tiny gap, Matteo saw his mother's face one last time, yellowed, exhausted, and too peaceful for a woman who had worked herself to death cleaning other people's houses. The sound that tore out of his chest didn't feel human. It was a raw, broken noise, swallowed by the warm daylight and the polite, distant murmurs of strangers who had already begun to step back as if grief were a contagious disease. Sweat rolled down his temples. The air smelled like dust, cut grass, and the faint sweetness of cheap funeral flowers. His hands shook as he gripped the edge of the casket because if he let go, he felt like he would fall straight into the dark with her. If you believe in hope, compassion, and second chances, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ripple of Love. Your support keeps real stories like this alive. Matteo had learned to survive on very little. By the age of 9, he was waking up before sunrise to help his mother tie trash bags full of donated clothes, walking 3 miles to school in shoes 2 sizes too big, and pretending hunger was just a normal part of life. When she grew sick, he left school and took a warehouse job that pulled the skin from his hands and bent his back forward like a question mark. He never complained. He never stopped. Now, at 28, he stood alone at her funeral in a borrowed black suit that didn't quite fit, with a cheap silver ring in his pocket that he'd planned to give her as a thank you for everything she'd done. It felt ridiculous now, dead weight against his fingers. The cemetery sat on a low hill under a sun so bright it felt cruel. Birds moved lazily through the trees. The world didn't pause like Matteo thought it should. Children laughed somewhere far away, cars passed on a nearby road, and the sky remained painfully blue. As people trickled away, he felt something fold inward inside himself, like a door finally shutting on the last piece of warmth he had in the world. That was when he noticed her. She stood a few meters away beneath an old oak tree, one hand pressed carefully beneath her swollen belly, the other gripping a crumpled tissue. Her dress was simple, pale gray, tightened uncomfortably around the curve of her pregnancy. Her face was pale, almost translucent in the harsh sunlight, and her eyes looked swollen from crying. But she hadn't stood beside any family. She hadn't placed flowers. She just watched from a distance, trembling slightly, as if she didn't belong there yet couldn't walk away. Matteo's grief wrapped itself around him like a wet blanket, but something older and deeper pushed through it, his mother's voice in his memory, always telling him to notice people who look like they might fall. The woman suddenly swayed. It was small at first. A shift of weight. A blink too slow. Then the bag strap slid from her shoulder and hit the dry grass. She tried to bend and reach it, but the movement was wrong, awkward, painful. Matteo didn't think. He moved. He crossed the distance between them with legs that felt borrowed, picked up the bag, and gently took her elbow before she dropped fully to her knees. Her body was warm through the cheap fabric of her sleeve. She smelled faintly of soap and something metallic like fear. In that moment, Matteo forgot his own loss. He forgot the open hole in his chest and the coldness waiting for him at home. All he saw was another fragile human being about to break under the sun. He guided her slowly toward a shaded bench near the path. The leaves above filtered the daylight into gentle flickers, softening the sharpness of everything. He placed the bag beside her and walked to a rusty water fountain nearby, cupping water into his palms before offering it in the most careful way he could. She drank with shaking fingers, her breath uneven, her shoulders rising and falling like she was trying to hold back a storm. She didn't say much. Matteo didn't push. He sat a few feet away, watching the dust rise at every passing step of other mourners. He noticed the thinness of her wrists, the slight shake in her hands, the deep sadness carved into the set of her mouth. There was something heavy in her gaze, something old and bruised. He recognized it, because it lived inside him too. After a few quiet minutes, she slowly stood and steadied herself. She didn't touch him, but she looked at him in a way that felt like a silent promise. Then she walked down the gravel path and disappeared beyond the rows of headstones, leaving nothing behind but the warmth of her presence and the faint echo of relief. Mateo thought that was the end of it. A small act in a lifetime of pain. He went home to a one-room apartment with peeling walls and a ceiling stained by old leaks. He sat on the mattress and stared at the crack in the wall that looked like a lightning bolt. The funeral program lay on the floor beside his shoes. He held the silver ring in his palm until the edges dug into his skin, finally letting grief pour out of him in violent, silent waves. His shoulders collapsed. His face twisted. The sobs came without sound at first, then with shaking breath that felt like glass in his lungs. The world felt empty. The future felt like a hallway with no doors. Hours later, the knock came. It was soft, almost hesitant. Mateo wiped his face on the sleeve of his wrinkled suit and opened the door to an empty hallway. No footsteps. No echo of retreating shoes. Just a large envelope sitting on the cracked linoleum in front of him. It was heavy. Inside, there was a neatly folded letter and a bank draft that made his vision blur. The number looked wrong, unreal, like a printing error. $500 million. His heart slammed violently against his ribs. His hand started to shake so hard the paper trembled. He sat on the floor, back against the peeling wall, and unfolded the letter with fingers that felt numb. The woman explained that she had followed him from a distance after the cemetery. She had seen the worn-out soles of his shoes, the way he tried to straighten his jacket, the way he never once asked her for anything. She explained that she was the sole heir to a vast family fortune she had never asked for and never wanted. Her life had been built on cold contracts, lonely mansions, and the unending ache of knowing that every smile directed at her came with a price. She was at the funeral because she had lost a childhood friend in silence, someone the world didn't know she loved. She was pregnant, alone, and suffocating under the weight of people who wanted to own her future. She wrote how his simple act had undone her. No cameras. No recognition. No pressure. Just kindness. She said she wanted her child to grow up in a world where that kind of person didn't get crushed by life. She wanted her child to know that somewhere out there, goodness existed in the hands of a stranger who had nothing and still chose to give. She had transferred the money because she believed people like him were the only people who deserved miracles. Mateo couldn't breathe. The walls around him felt too close. The stained ceiling looked like it was tilting. He pressed the heel of his hand into his eyes and let out a strangled laugh that turned into another wave of tears. Not from pain. The first crack appeared in Mateo's hands when he realized the money didn't erase the memories. Even after the leaking ceiling was repaired, even after the fridge was full, even after the silence of an empty stomach stopped haunting his nights, he still woke up sometimes sweating, hearing the sound of dirt hitting a wooden coffin. The softness of his new bed felt unfamiliar. The warmth in his apartment felt borrowed. The sunlight through the clean windows felt almost fake, like a painted background in a movie that didn't quite belong to him. Wealth had changed the walls. It hadn't changed the scars. He kept his life simple. No luxury. No headlines. No rewards. He wore the same cheap watch. Walked the same streets. Sat on the same cracked benches. Because Mateo believed something sacred: if money ever made him forget who he was, then he would lose the only thing his mother had truly given him, his soul. A year after the funeral, on a bright afternoon drenched in golden daylight, Mateo returned to the old cemetery again. Not for grief this time. For gratitude. The air was warm. The sky was wide and soft. The world felt quiet in a way that didn't hurt. That's when he saw a black luxury car parked near the gravel path. It looked impossibly out of place, glossy, expensive, untouched by dust. A silent intruder in a place meant for endings. Mateo felt something shift in his chest. Not fear. Not anger. Something like intuition. The door opened slowly. A woman stepped out. Not pregnant anymore. She walked with grace but also with hesitation, like someone stepping into a chapter she never planned to reopen. Her hair was pulled back gently. Her face looked stronger, calmer, but her eyes were the same. Deep. Storm-filled. Remembering. Behind her, a small child stepped into daylight. A boy. About 1 year old. Round cheeks. Curious eyes. Tiny fingers holding her hand. He stared at Mateo without fear, only wonder. Like he recognized safety without knowing why. The air tightened around them. The woman didn't smile. Mateo didn't move. The child squeezed her fingers and gently pulled her forward, as if life itself was nudging her to keep walking. She had found him. Mateo felt his chest stretch tight. So many thoughts crashed into him all at once. Why now? How? What did she want? She reached into her bag slowly and pulled out a folded paper. Not a check. Not money. Something old-fashioned. Something human. A birth certificate. The light caught it softly. The child's name, Isaac. The blank space beside father, empty. Mateo's breathing turned shallow. He didn't touch the paper. He just looked at it. Looked at the boy. Looked at the woman who had once stood shaking in the shade of an oak tree on the worst day of his life. A realization moved through him like slow fire. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about repayment. This was about meaning. The woman's eyes held something new now, not fear, not loneliness, but vulnerability. A silent message passed between them that needed no sound. She wasn't asking him to be a savior. She wasn't asking for rescue. She was asking for presence. The boy took a tiny step forward. His small shoes pressed into the gravel. He reached his hand out toward Mateo, fingers open, innocent, soft. Mateo lowered himself slowly. Not as a rich man. Not as someone powerful. But as the same broken man who once lifted a stranger from the grass when no one else noticed her falling. His fingers wrapped gently around the child's. Warm. Real. Alive. If this moment moved something inside you, support this story by liking, sharing, and subscribing to Ripple of Love. Your support gives these stories life. The woman didn't ask for forgiveness. Mateo didn't ask for explanations. Because some stories don't need words. Some truths pass through silence and are understood by the soul instead of the ears. She handed him the papers, not ownership, not pressure, but choice. Choice to walk away. Choice to stay. Choice to become something more than a survivor. Before the final moment, tell us in the comments, what do you think Mateo should do? That evening, Mateo walked alongside them in the daylight as it turned golden and slow. The shadows grew long across the road, but none of them felt afraid of them anymore. The boy held Mateo's finger the entire way, trusting him with a purity that broke something open inside Mateo's chest. Years of grief, hunger, loss, and loneliness didn't disappear. But for the first time, they didn't feel like chains. They felt like stepping stones. Mateo understood that the miracle was never the money. It was the connection. The choice. The quiet moment when one soul sees another at their weakest and decides not to look away. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with soft fire, Mateo realized that his life wasn't just about surviving loss anymore. It was about becoming the safe place he once needed, for a child, for a woman who had tasted loneliness, and for the broken parts of himself. And somewhere between the light and the shadows, with a tiny hand in his and a quiet courage in his heart, Mateo stepped forward into a future he never imagined, not built on wealth, but built on love, presence, and the kind of miracle that only happens when a stranger dares to care.